What if the poorest man in the market was richer than everyone combined? This is Amara, who gave her last plate of food to a stranger she thought had nothing.
Elias Rourke was 58 years old, and he owned more than most small nations. His company, Rourke Dynamics, built the servers that ran half the world's banks. His name appeared on the cover of business magazines so often that he had stopped reading his own profiles. He had a penthouse with a view of 3 bridges, a private jet with his initials stitched into the leather seats, and a security detail that followed him everywhere. And yet, Elias Rourke was the loneliest man in the city. It had not always been this way. 20 years ago, before the company had its first billion, before the magazine covers, Elias had been a man who fixed motorcycles in a garage with his father. He remembered what it felt like to count coins for bread. He remembered a woman at the corner store who used to slip an extra roll into his bag when his father couldn't afford enough, and never once made him feel small for needing it. He had never forgotten her kindness. He had spent 30 years trying to find people like her again, and mostly failing. Because here was the truth that success had taught him, bitterly. Money changes the way people look at you. When you are Elias Rourke, CEO, people smile at you because of what you can give them. Business partners laugh at your jokes a little too hard. Employees agree with you a little too quickly. Somewhere in the last 2 decades, Elias had lost the ability to know who genuinely cared about him, and who simply cared about his wallet. So he started doing something strange. Once every few months, he would disappear. No security, no driver, no phone that could be traced. He would put on an old coat, rough sandals, and walk into the poorest parts of the city as a nobody. An old, tired stranger with empty pockets, just to see how people treated a man who had nothing to offer them. Most of the time, the answer broke his heart a little more. The Eastgate market was loud, colorful, and merciless in the way that busy places often are. Vendors shouted prices over each other. Motorbikes weaved between stalls piled with tomatoes, dried fish, second-hand shoes, and folded fabric in every color. It was a place where everyone was hustling to survive, which meant it was also a place where the weak were easy to overlook, or worse, easy to blame. Elias arrived that morning dressed as Old Tunde, a name he used for himself on these outings. He wore a torn gray coat 2 sizes too big, sandals held together with wire, and a walking stick he didn't need, but that made him look frail enough to be ignored. His hands, which normally signed billion-dollar contracts, were smudged with dust he had rubbed on that morning on purpose. He shuffled between the stalls, watching. A woman selling oranges shooed him away before he even said a word. A young man selling phone chargers rolled his eyes and turned his back. Nobody looked him in the eye. In this city, in this market, an old man in torn clothes was invisible, until he became inconvenient. That happened at the fabric stall of a trader named Boma. Old Tunde had paused near Boma's stall, resting his weight on his stick, when his elbow accidentally brushed a folded stack of cloth, knocking a bolt of blue fabric into the dirt. "You clumsy old fool!" Boma's voice cracked across the market like a whip. He came around the stall fast, grabbing the old man's coat collar. "You think you can just wander around ruining people's goods because you have nothing better to do? Get out! Get out before I call the market police!" A small crowd began to gather the way crowds do, drawn by raised voices, hungry for a spectacle. A few people laughed. Someone filmed it on a phone, the way people film everything now, more curious about the drama than the man being shaken by his collar. "I'm sorry," Old Tunde said quietly, his eyes down. "I didn't mean—" I don't care what you meant. Boma shoved him, and the old man stumbled, his stick clattering to the ground. People like you shouldn't even be allowed in a respectable market. Go back to the gutter you crawled out of. It was, for Elias Rourke, a man used to boardrooms where people chose their words with surgical precision, a genuinely shocking sentence to hear directed at him. He had heard people say worse things about strangers before. He had simply never been the stranger. And then, a voice cut through the crowd. Boma, let him go. Amara ran the small food stall 2 spaces down, a modest wooden table with 2 benches where she sold rice, stew, and grilled plantain to market workers who needed a hot meal between customers. She was 31, sharp-eyed, with flour dust permanently on her apron, and the kind of tiredness in her shoulders that came from getting up at 4 a.m. every day for years. She was not rich. She was not powerful. She had exactly the amount of money it took to keep her stall running and her younger brother in school, and not 1 coin more. But she had something else, something that could not be bought, and that Elias, in 30 years of searching, had almost stopped believing still existed in strangers. He's an old man, Boma, Amara said, stepping between them. He tripped. Look at him. He can barely stand on his own. You want to shake him like a thief over a piece of cloth? Stay out of it, Amara. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when a grown man is putting his hands on someone who can't defend himself. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was a steadiness in it that made the crowd go quiet. How much is the fabric worth? Boma blinked, thrown off. What? The fabric. How much? 1,200. Amara reached into the pocket of her apron, where she kept the morning's earnings folded in a small cloth pouch. Money that was supposed to buy rice for tomorrow's stew, money she genuinely could not spare, and counted out 1,200 without hesitating. There, she said, pressing it into his hand. Now let him go, and go back to your stall. Boma stared at the money, then at her, then finally released old Tunde's collar with a scoff, muttering something under his breath about people wasting their money on strangers as he walked away. The crowd, having gotten its ending, dispersed. The show was over. Nobody stayed to check on the old man who had been shaken by his collar minutes before. Nobody except Amara. She crouched down, picked up his walking stick, and held it out to him. Are you hurt? She asked. Old Tunde, Elias, shook his head and found, to his own surprise, that his voice was unsteady. No, I'm fine. Thank you. Come, she said. Sit. You look like you haven't eaten today. He hadn't planned to. He hadn't planned for any of this. But he found himself sitting on the wooden bench at her stall, and a few minutes later, a plate of rice and stew was placed in front of him. A plate that represented a portion of the food she needed to sell to make her day's earnings back. I can't pay you, he said honestly, testing her, the way he had tested 100 strangers before her. I didn't ask you to, Amara said simply, wiping down the table beside him. Eat. You look like the wind could carry you away. Elias came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time he was old Tunde, quiet, careful, watching. Each time Amara made space for him at her stall without being asked, without making a show of it, without ever once asking him for anything in return. He learned things about her in the weeks that followed, sitting on that wooden bench. He learned that her parents had died when she was 22, leaving her to raise her younger brother, Chidi, alone. He learned that she had once dreamed of studying nutrition science at university. A dream she had folded away the day the responsibility of a teenager landed on her shoulders instead. He learned that she gave away at least one free meal a day to whichever customer looked the hungriest and least able to pay. A habit that meant her own stall barely broke even most weeks. "Why do you do it?" he asked her once, genuinely curious, genuinely unable to understand a kind of math that had nothing to do with profit. "You can't afford to feed people for free. You said so yourself." Amara considered the question while she stirred a pot of stew. "My mother used to say something," she said finally. She said, "You will never become poor from giving to someone poorer than you." I didn't understand it when I was young. I understand it now. What I give doesn't disappear, Babatunde. It just goes somewhere I can't see yet. Elias sat with that sentence for a long time after he left that day. In 30 years of contracts, mergers, and boardroom negotiations, no one had ever explained value to him so simply and so correctly. He began, without meaning to, looking forward to those afternoons more than he looked forward to anything else in his real life. The meetings, the deals, the applause when he walked into a room. There was no applause at Amara's stall. There was only a plate of rice, a bench in the shade, and a woman who talked to him like he mattered, because as far as she knew, he was simply an old man with nothing to offer her. That was the part that undid him. She had no idea who he was, and she was kind to him anyway. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Old Tunde had come to the stall as usual, but this time, 3 black SUVs pulled up at the edge of the market, an event so unusual in that neighborhood that half the vendors stopped what they were doing to stare. Men in suits stepped out. Amara recognized none of them. What she did recognize, with a jolt of confusion, was the way they walked directly toward her stall and stopped in front of old Tunde, straightening their posture. "Mr. Rourke," one of them said, "your 2 o'clock is waiting. We need to move now." Amara's stirring spoon stopped halfway to the pot. "Mr. what?" she said slowly. Old Tunde, Elias, stood, and for the first time in weeks, Amara watched something change in his posture. The stoop in his shoulders straightened. The tremble in his hands, which she had assumed was age, simply vanished. He looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between guilt and gratitude, and said the words that would upend her entire life. "My name is Elias Rourke," he said quietly. "I own Rourke Dynamics. I've been coming here for 6 weeks, disguised, because I wanted to know who would be kind to a man who had nothing to give them. I found my answer the very first day. It was you." For a long moment, Amara said nothing at all. The market noise around her, the shouting, the motorbikes, the sizzle of oil on a neighboring stove, seemed to fade into a dull hum. "You lied to me," she finally said, her voice tight. "I never lied about who I was to you," Elias said. "I never told you I was poor. You assumed it, and I let you believe it, because I needed to know the truth. I'm sorry for the deception. I'm not sorry for what I found." "What did you find?" Amara asked, her voice sharp now, hurt threading through the anger. "A poor woman you could feel good about helping? Is that what this was? A rich man's experiment?" "No," Elias said. And for the first time in the conversation, his voice cracked slightly. A sound so unfamiliar to him that even he seemed startled by it. "I found the only person in 6 years who treated me like a human being when I had nothing to give her. Amara, you gave a stranger your last 1,200 to protect him from being humiliated. You've been feeding people you can't afford to feed for years because your mother told you kindness doesn't disappear. I've spent 30 years surrounded by people who smile at my money. You're the first person who ever smiled at me." News travels fast in a market. It travels faster on the internet. By that evening, a video someone had filmed of the SUVs arriving, and of Elias Rourke, one of the most photographed billionaires in the country, standing in ragged clothes at a food stall, had been uploaded, shared, and reshared until it had over 4 million views. By the next morning, Amara's name and face were everywhere, whether she wanted them to be or not. "Market woman discovers secret billionaire," read one headline. "The kindness that made a billionaire cry," read another, embellishing a moment that had, admittedly, come close to true. Some of the comments were kind. Many were not. She probably knew who he was the whole time. Nobody's that generous by accident. Gold digger found her jackpot. Bet she's already got a lawyer picking out a wedding dress. Amara read exactly 4 of these comments before she put her phone away and did not touch it again for 2 days. It was one thing to be poor and invisible. It was another thing entirely to be poor, visible, and suspected of something she had never once considered. She had given a stranger a plate of rice. She had not asked for a single thing in return. And now the entire internet was accusing her of engineering a con she hadn't even known was possible. Her brother, Chidi, found her outside their small house that night, sitting on the step, staring at nothing. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, sitting beside her. "I know that," Amara said. "But it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what 4 million strangers have already decided about me." Elias came to find her 3 days later. Not as old Tunde this time, but as himself, in a plain shirt with no security detail, standing awkwardly outside her house like a man who had negotiated 100 corporate acquisitions and had no idea how to apologize to one person. "I didn't think about what this would cost you," he admitted, before she could speak. "I was so focused on finding someone real that I didn't think about what happens to someone real once the whole world is watching them." "I'm sorry, Amara. Truly." "Everyone thinks I did this on purpose," she said. "They think I'm some kind of... I don't even know what they think I am. A schemer, a gold digger. 6 weeks ago, I was just a woman selling rice." "Then let them see the truth," Elias said. "Let me help you show them who you actually are. Not by giving you money, because I understand now that you'd never take it just for taking it, but by giving you the thing you actually wanted before your parents died. The thing you gave up." He told her then about a scholarship, full tuition, nutrition science, the exact program she had once dreamed about at the university across the city. Not a gift with strings attached, not payment for her kindness. A door simply opened that she was free to walk through or ignore. Amara sat with the offer for a long time in silence, turning it over the way she turned over every decision that mattered, slowly and carefully, because she had learned young that fast decisions were a luxury of people who had a safety net. "If I take this," she finally said, "everyone will say I finally got what I was after." "Some will," Elias agreed honestly. "The internet believes what's easiest to believe, not what's true. But Amara, you fed strangers for years before anyone was watching. You gave away money you needed to protect someone you'd never met. Whether you take this scholarship or not doesn't change who you already were before I ever walked into your market. It only changes what you do next." Amara did not take the scholarship immediately. She thought about it for 2 weeks, weeks in which she kept running her stall exactly as before, still slipping free meals to the hungriest-looking customers, still refusing to speak to reporters who camped near the market gate hoping for a quote. What finally changed her mind wasn't the scholarship itself, It was a moment with an old woman who came to her stall one afternoon, thin and tired, unable to pay for a plate of food. Amara served her anyway, the way she always had, and the old woman, not recognizing her from the videos, simply said, "Thank you, daughter. God will multiply this for you." Amara realized, standing there, that the internet's opinion of her had never actually changed anything real. She was still the same woman, doing the same thing she had always done. The only thing that had changed was who was watching. She accepted the scholarship, not because a billionaire offered it, but because she decided, finally, that she was allowed to want something for herself too, after 10 years of only wanting things for other people. She kept the food stall. She trained a young woman from her neighborhood, Fatima, to run it during her class hours, splitting the earnings so neither of them went without. Elias Rourke became, over time, not a benefactor she owed anything to, but something closer to what he had been at that wooden bench in the beginning. A quiet, ordinary friend. One of the very few people in his life who had earned that title honestly. 3 years later, Amara graduated with a degree in nutrition science and opened a small community kitchen next to her old stall, a place where anyone could eat a hot meal, regardless of what was in their pocket. Funded not by Elias Rourke's fortune, but by a cooperative of market vendors who had watched her feed them for free for years and finally had the means to feed her back. The video of the billionaire disguised as an old man still circulates online sometimes, resurfacing every few months in a new wave of shares. But the comment that gets pinned to the top now, the one with the most likes, isn't about the billionaire at all. It reads, "She didn't know who he was. That's the whole point. That's why it mattered." Kindness is easy to give when you know it will be rewarded. It is rare, and it is precious, when you give it to someone who has nothing. Because that is the only time it tells the truth about who you really are. Amara never set out to change her life. She only refused to let a stranger be humiliated in front of her. Everything else was simply what kindness, left alone long enough, eventually grows into. If this story moved you, remember, you never know who you're really standing in front of. Treat everyone as if they matter, because they already do. If you like this story, please subscribe to my channel.